Welcome back to the Constitutional Clarion. Many of you will have seen commentary in the media about the Australian Commonwealth Government banning under-16s from YouTube and threats by YouTube that it might bring a constitutional challenge to the validity of such action. In this video, I'll give a critical assessment of what the legislation does and doesn't do and how this affects constitutional validity. I did an earlier video on the 22nd of November 2024 which addresses other issues in relation to this legislation. The first and most important point to make is that most of what you have been told by politicians about the ban is complete and utter rubbish. Under-16s are not being banned from viewing YouTube. The law does nothing of the kind. Nor is this law going to get kids off their devices and out into the back garden. Nor is it going to do much to protect them from harm. It might divert harm from some mediums to others, but it won't stop young people from seeing harmful content. There are major disconnects between what we are told the purpose of the law is and what the law actually does and what it's likely to achieve. Let me explain first what the law actually does and doesn't do. It doesn't prohibit under-16s from using any kind of social media. This remains completely lawful. The law does something quite different. Section 63, capital D of the Online Safety Act 2021, which comes into effect in December this year, requires providers of certain social media platforms to take reasonable steps to prevent users under 16 from having an account with the platform. And that's it. So if a platform doesn't require a person to hold an account to be able to view content on its platform, as is the case with YouTube, then it doesn't stop young people from watching content on the platform, including harmful content. Does the government have parents' backs by getting Johnny off his computer and out kicking the footy in the back garden? Well, no. The regulations just made by the Minister, these are the Online Safety Age-Restricted Social Media Platforms Rules of 2025, expressly exclude from the application of the Act services that have the sole or primary purpose of enabling end users to play online games with other end users. So Johnny can stay locked away in his bedroom playing computer games until the early hours of the morning, or indeed watching misogynistic videos on YouTube. Parents are getting no support from the government at all to stop that, even though they might have been conned into thinking otherwise. What about Sally? Is this law going to protect her from being bullied online and encouraged to harm herself? Well, no. The new rules also specifically exclude services that have the sole or primary purpose of enabling end users to communicate by means of messaging, email, voice calling or video calling. So while the bullying might shift from, say, a Facebook group to a WhatsApp group, this law is not going to stop any of it from actually happening. According to the explanatory memorandum to the new rules, this landmark reform reflects Australians' expectations for a strong regulatory response to addressing online harms experienced by children and young people on these services. Really? Well, no. That's just the propaganda. It's not the reality. But the new rules and law do potentially do one useful thing. The law is really directed at disconnecting children from the algorithm which feeds them content. Algorithms can be good. If you like videos about sewing clothes, then the algorithm will feed you lots of similar videos, and that's very convenient and it's not in the least bit harmful. But the algorithm can also be damaging. Currently, if a child searches for a diet or something about ideal body weight, he or she will be deluged with recommendations about videos on dieting, which may indeed become progressively more extreme and harmful. The same can occur with political views or views about the differences between males and females. You can get dropped into an echo chamber where you are exposed constantly to the very same ideas so that you fail to see or accept any other points of view. Worse, you can be guided into extreme forms of misogyny, discrimination, or violent political activism. This can be particularly damaging for young viewers who have not yet developed their own political or social views. If a viewer does not have an account, then, at least in theory, the algorithm does not know what they have been watching and therefore can't develop its harmful feeding activities. It's the algorithmic recommended content and the continual feeds, including autoplay and infinite scrolling, which develop and feed addiction in much the same way as poker machines. And this is what the law seems to be really aimed at disrupting. Whether it does so or not will depend on technology matters that are well beyond my knowledge. When I asked a young person about this, they suggested that the algorithm could still feed up material to young people who watch YouTube, even if they don't have a YouTube account, relying on other means. So, for example, if the young person has a Gmail account and they're logged into it at the time. So, whether the law will be effective in disrupting the application of the algorithm to young people remains to be seen. I can see the policy reasons for trying to disrupt the application of the algorithm, and if the legislation and regulation had been publicly sold on that basis, I think it would have much more credibility. But it has been oversold with declared purposes that the law cannot possibly fulfil. What relevance does this have to the constitutional challenge? The problem here is that disconnect between the aims and the effects of the law and how this interacts with the constitutionally implied freedom of political communication. One argument that has been raised is that children under the age of 16 have no right to vote, so their communications are not protected by the implied freedom. There are two reasons why that's not the case. First, the implied freedom doesn't operate as a personal right. It's instead a limit on the legislative and executive power of the Commonwealth and the states. In short, it means that Parliament can't make laws that limit the freedom to engage in communication about political matters unless the law satisfies a test that has been laid down by the High Court. Second, the High Court held in Unions New South Wales and New South Wales No. 1 in 2013 that political communications by non-voters, such as unions, corporations and non-citizens, still fell within the scope of the implied freedom because they too operate within and are affected by the system of government and laws of this country. Moreover, young people, if they're citizens, will gain the right to vote when they turn 18. Political communications that they are exposed to or engage in when they are younger may very well influence the formation of their political views and how they vote in later life. For example, those who were young during the Vietnam War protests and the Whitlam dismissal may have been influenced by those events when they later came to vote. Equally, young people today may be influenced by political communications about matters such as climate change when deciding how to vote in the future. So yes, if a law burdens the ability to engage in political communication, it will trigger the application of the implied freedom, even though it affects people who are only under 16. But does this law amount to an effective burden on the implied freedom in its terms, operation or effect? And that's the first question that the High Court asks as part of its test. A person does not require an account to watch YouTube videos. This means that they can watch all the political content they want on YouTube, including learning about the Constitution on this channel. The law only requires YouTube to take reasonable steps to stop anyone under 16 from having a YouTube account. So what is the effect of that burden? 1. A young person could not subscribe to a YouTube channel to receive notifications about new videos from it. That would mean that they would have to actively look for the content. But it doesn't stop them accessing that content, it just requires a bit more effort. In my view, that's probably not an effective burden on the implied freedom. 2. A young person would, probably, not receive content recommendations from the algorithm, keeping them out of an echo chamber that potentially manipulates the formulation of their political views. I doubt whether that would be regarded as a burden on the implied freedom. It may indeed be regarded as enhancing the implied freedom by potentially not narrowing the political views to which the person is exposed. 3. A young person could not make comments on videos on YouTube, indicate likes or dislikes for videos, or upload their own videos. This is likely to be where any burden lies because it would inhibit the person from engaging in political debate with respect to those videos. A viewer of this channel who is under 16 would not be able to enter into the comments section and ask me questions about how the Constitution operates in relation to political matters. The new law would also prevent under 16s from initiating debate and engagement by making their own videos on political matters that are of importance to them. Accordingly, while there would not be a huge burden on the implied freedom of political communication from a law that stops under 16s from having YouTube accounts, there would be some burden, and that would probably be enough to trigger the rest of the test. So the next question the High Court would ask is whether the law has a legitimate object that is compatible with the maintenance of the constitutionally prescribed system of representative and responsible government. Here, the Commonwealth Government says that its object is to protect young people from harm, which the Commonwealth has identified as including excessive screen time, social isolation, sleep interference, poor mental and physical health, and low life satisfaction. While a court would most likely accept that these are legitimate objects, it's much harder to tie them to what the law actually does. But assuming that the court would politely accept the government's assurances that these are the objects of the law, the real problem will arise at the third level of the test. Is the law reasonably appropriate and adapted to advance those legitimate objects in a manner that is compatible with the maintenance of the constitutionally prescribed system of representative and responsible government? Now, in layman's terms, this really means, is the law carefully designed to achieve those legitimate objects, that is, protecting young people from those harms, in a way that has the least impact upon freedom of political communication? This is where the trouble lies, because there's such a disconnect between what the law is claimed to do and what it actually does. While there's an ongoing dispute within the High Court as to whether to apply a more structured proportionality test in answering that question, it's worth noting how it would operate here. Under that test, a court would ask whether the law is justified as A, suitable, meaning that it has a rational connection to its purported purpose. B, necessary, meaning there's no obvious and compelling alternative, reasonably practical means of achieving the same purpose, which has a less restrictive effect on the freedom. And C, adequate in its balance, meaning that the importance of the purpose being served by the law outweighs the extent of the restriction imposed upon the implied freedom. You can probably see by now the problem here. On the one hand, there's not a huge burden on the implied freedom imposed by this law, but on the other, it would be very hard to say that the law is actually suitable, necessary, and proportionate in how it seeks to give effect to its claimed legitimate objects. Now, I should point out the obvious conflict here in that I do have a YouTube channel which clearly falls within the scope of political communication. But you already know that because you're watching it. Would the law in any way affect me? Well, probably not. I would be very annoyed if it meant that young people could not watch my videos and learn about the Constitution, or if they could not be used in schools or, say, for homework. Because the whole point of this channel is public education. But, as I've explained, the law actually doesn't do that. Anyone can watch my videos, and of course, everyone should. It's true that the law would prevent under-16s from subscribing to my channel and contributing to the comments. Now, I did check my analytics and YouTube still tells me that I have 0 subscribers under the age of 18. Now, I do know from comments on previous videos that that's wrong because I have been contacted by subscribers who say they are under 18, but the numbers are still probably so low as to not have been counted, or maybe my young viewers all have accounts that claim to be from someone over 18, as most young people do seem to have. As for monetisation, I can't see that it would make a difference as it's based upon views, which are not really impeded, except to the extent that the algorithm's not feeding my videos to under-16s, and frankly, it probably doesn't anyway. It might cost me 1 or 2 cents over a year, but I can live with that. My final observation is that this legislation was passed in a rush last year with no serious scrutiny. It seemed to be fueled by moral panic and political opportunism rather than considered policy making. We still have no idea about what reasonable steps will have to be taken by platforms to avoid the severe penalties. Does this mean that all of us will have to establish our identities to use social media? And what does that mean for privacy or the security of our identity data? A couple of provisions were inserted in the Act about destroying data held or not misusing it, but frankly, these are far from reassuring. It would have been much better to know first what it was going to mean and then debate that before passing the law, not the reverse. Thank you for watching the Constitutional Clarion, and as always, I look forward to seeing you again, and especially my very precious younger viewers. Goodbye.